Just to start, really, I think we face some of the biggest challenges ever for medtech. At the moment, we have 8 million patients waiting for surgery, so there's such an opportunity for technology to help to solve problems in the NHS, but the challenge is that Europe is becoming a very low down the priority list of particularly US companies coming to Europe, and we've really enjoyed seeing them over the decades, and we're very proud to see Histosonics here supporting their technology in the UK. But I think we're facing a medtech drought, and we all need to work harder to try and get technologies to patients faster. So I've been tasked to run this on unmet clinical need opportunities in tech disruption and enhancement. So we've got a great people on the panel. We've got, as introduced earlier, and I've got some questions for them. So I've got this here. So starting with Manoj. Yeah, sorry, Manoj, yeah. So what are your patients asking for? What's, in the work that you do, what are people wanting from medtech and from the industry?
I've been part of the patient public involvement group at Leeds Surgical Medtech for about 5-6 years. There's a number of us, and we act as critical friends. Whenever an innovator, inventor comes up with any ideas, we sort of listen attentively to their ideas. We think from a patient, care, and family perspective whether the intervention innovation will work. We'll also think about the patient burden. So we like to think we act as critical friends. We ensure that they never forget that there's a patient at the end of the journey, and ultimately these innovations have to work within the NHS, and they have to be at an affordable price within which the NHS Trust can purchase them, and ultimately the patient will benefit. So we ensure that they never forget that. So we bring reality to the discussions from a patient, care, and family perspective.
That's great, thanks, Manoj. How can we work faster to enhance their lives with the work you're doing?
I think I will pass the mic on to someone else.
Okay, that's fine. That's great, thank you. So moving on to, obviously Manoj is involved in voice of the patient sort of work, to the health economics with Deborah. How important is that sort of health economics side from your perspective in medtech?
Well, I'm not a health economist, but I work very closely with health economists. I think we're changing the way that we're working now. We have to pick winners to streamline things through the research pathway quickly. And part of the picking winners is picking the things that are going to be affordable in the NHS. So that early, I think historically we used to do health economics at the end of a study. We're bringing that health economics right to the forefront. There's the health economist there. Bringing that health economics right to the forefront, and before we start the clinical study, we've often got multiple devices working in a similar space. Which ones can we take through, which ones should we be pulling through, relies very much on some of that modelling.
Sure, that's great. And do you do any work in the very early development stage with the device companies in terms of helping them with understanding their pricing structures and how much they can sell their technologies for? Because traditionally we all know that pharmaceuticals, they don't invent drugs, spend billions on developing them, then work out how to price them. And I think one of the challenges of medtech, why it's so hard to get these technologies to market, is that many of them follow the principles of marketing, which is product, price, place, promotion. And by doing that, and by developing products and not understanding how to sell them at an appropriate price that benefits patients, providers and payers, often they fail because they realise they can't sell the technology for the price that they thought they could in the first place. So is that sort of work going on in your organisation?
Yeah, I think you've explained it really well. And yes, that's exactly what the health economics team do early doors, creating these models that you can then put devices and interventions into those working models knowing the probabilities of some of the longer term events that are going to happen and the economic impact of those, to be able to identify the ones that we should be bringing forward to then, from a sort of early phase safety evidence into clinical evaluation and patient reported outcomes. Part of the start of that journey is which ones we select based on the ones that can make it in the NHS.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Moving on to sort of, great to have somebody from the regulatory side here with Mike at the end there. So do you think the regulations are getting any easier? I know you're more in the diagnostic space, but we're seeing massive challenges in medtech.
I mean, I think that's a fairly easy question to answer, and it's a no. I think we've got a problem with sort of translating innovation into clinical practice, and particularly around reimbursement, with a current baseline of a fairly low regulatory framework to be working against. If you look at the direction of travel that we're moving in, which is good for patient safety, and we need regulatory reform, then the bar that is being placed in new regulatory frameworks internationally, not just in the UK or in Europe, but internationally, is a much higher level of regulatory requirement for companies to have to address. And in order to get that combination right, they're going to have to think very much around intended purpose, use case, and for diagnostics in particular, where the same technology can have 1,000 different applications across the whole patient journey, from screening through to diagnosis, through to monitoring treatment outcomes. You know, picking that intended use in the population and using tools like health economic modelling to really refine and to target where that killer first indication is, and to make sure that that's achievable within your funding envelope and your runway for a particular company. You know, it may be that screening is the thing that you really want to go for eventually, but that could be, you know, a 10-year randomized control trial before you get the evidence for adoption into NICE. So that might not be the first indication you really want to go for. And one of the things we used to do in the MIC, and I still work with companies on, is actually looking at that range of technologies and working with partners in patient groups and in the healthcare system to identify what those use cases are and to develop target product profiles. So I don't know if have you got questions on target product profiles later, or shall I talk a little bit about TPPs?
Please cover them if you like.
So target product profiles is something we've done quite a lot of work in Leeds, and I've seen Paola Coco in the audience. There she is. So Paola was a PhD student, and she did her thesis on reviewing and developing target product profile methodologies just before the pandemic hit. And actually that methodology has since been sort of applied internationally, particularly for COVID tests, but also with WHO now we're developing lots of target product profiles. It's a fundamental principle of WHO in order to drive new innovation to solve unmet clinical needs internationally. And what these product specifications do is they essentially bring a range of stakeholders, particularly clinicians and patients and regulators, together to actually look at what is the unmet clinical need that needs to be addressed. And if we could have the perfect technology, what would that look like? And actually, what would be the minimum requirements that we would accept in order to procure these technologies? And, you know, TPPs are lists of about 30 to 50 specifications, but they really guide industry to what is the expectation of the end users. Now, there has historically been a bit of criticism about TPPs being a bit finger in the air, and there are still a few TPPs on WHO's website which might have 100% sensitivity and specificity requirements, which is somewhat ambitious. But again, this is where early economic modelling and good engagement and good methodology can help to bring those requirements down to the true, you know, sort of level of value that would be beneficial to patients. So I think that's something that NHS organisations can really do, is to clearly articulate what that unmet clinical need is, and to stimulate innovation, and ideally to be able to put their wallets behind those innovation challenges, and to have some kind of way of guaranteeing that if you build it, we will buy it. That I think would be really beneficial to pull and drive new innovation into the healthcare system.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you for covering that. I mean, what we're facing from a regulatory perspective is more and more companies developing products in the UK and launching first in the United States, and we've not seen this before ever, certainly in the 14 years I've been running Device Access. So there's going to be a drought, I think, in terms of tech coming here, and also disappointing to see companies developing the evidence here and going to the other markets, particularly the US first, which is a challenge in itself. But what do you think we could do to help UK become a first country again?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of discussion at the moment with ministers, with UK government, and with the MHRA and trade associations, of which I'm representing BIVDA today, the British In Vitro Diagnostic Association, around that exact question. Because if we look at what's happened with the implementation of IVDR in Europe, it's provided some real challenges. And I think we were looking at aligning ourselves very much with that agenda and that direction of travel, but there's been sufficient opportunity for reflection on that and to try to learn from the lessons of IVDR. And what I'm hearing more and what we're pushing as BIVDA is this international alignment of regulatory frameworks, and really trying to align the UK framework internationally and to look at opportunities for alliance and recognition, but to do so in a way where the requirements, if you like, of the UK are such that they have certain advantages, and that the integration of regulatory with that wider system, the research infrastructure, the digital informatics health infrastructure that we have, and also the reimbursement and sort of health technology assessment frameworks, means that we create an attractive environment where the UK becomes a stepping stone for Europe and the US, rather than a secondary afterthought to the European Union and the US. So there's a fine balance in getting that right and making sure that we keep patient safety, as our sort of North Star driving principle, but actually making sure that, through ensuring that, we have perfectly safe devices, we end up with no devices on the market and patients still suffering from the consequences of that. So the regulators need to walk this fine tightrope of risk-benefit and balance the interests of patient safety with the interests of ensuring that we get technologies into clinic and serving patients. And that's a tricky balance, but it's a hot subject at the moment, and BIVDA is certainly trying to support those agendas.
Great, thank you. I thought I'd bring that one up. Big topic at the moment. Moving on into the sort of market access side, Peter, are the industry engaging early enough when it comes to reimbursement?
Well, probably the simple answer is probably no. And it comes back a little bit to when we get health economics involved. You need to be there at the beginning, because if you don't know, do they actually need that product? Is there an appetite for that product?
Yeah.
You're going to go all the way through your clinical research, spend millions of pounds, get to the end of it, and somebody will go, well, didn't you ask that research question, which is pivotal to whether or not we want to pay for it. So I think the simple answer to your question is no. We need to be involved a lot earlier. And I think it's recognising that it's a partnership. I know David spoke very much about seeing industry as partners with the engagement. I think it's a very important message.
So, what can they do better, do you think?
Industry?
Yeah.
I think it's almost like it's on the other side of the fence. I think industry wants to engage. Yeah. I think it's for the government as well to take a very strong lead and send a clear message out. But I think clinical needs to reach out and not see industry as a threat. I think historically there's been a perception that industry is in it for profit, and there's definitely shareholders to account for. But I think it's important for the people, I'm talking to people in the room here, you look at industry as a true partner in terms of development, because they need those new products, they need those innovations.
I think it's a good point. I mean, I'm on the organising committee for unmet, which is the US biggest medtech conference, and where they celebrate technology and say how many lives have been saved through pacemakers and new technologies. And it's a shame that the industry is seen like that, but no surprise in that many of them are unable to sell their products besides saying they're cheaper. And, when we engage with companies, it's about asking them to sell the problem they solve, not the product. So sell the problem you solve, not the product. And many of them can't describe and back those claims of problems that they solve. And we sit in a country full of the most incredible data and the most incredible researchers, and we know where the pressures are in the NHS, we know where the waiting lists are, we know about outcomes in a way that other countries in the world can't, probably besides Sweden. So it's disappointing, and often I feel that industry, it's some of their own fault that they don't have the right messaging with customers to get tech to market. So I appreciate that feedback. David, your work is involved in, fascinated to learn how you're able to do research faster, and obviously a very important part of the journey of market access and getting products to market is doing the research, and fascinated to hear more about what you do.
Yeah, sure. I should probably give a bit of context. I guess I'm very much on the industry side here, and I'm wearing two hats today. So I'm a non-exec director for a company you've probably never heard of called Revena, but it's one of the main providers of technical due diligence for medtech and life science investors, VC, private equity globally. And one of the things that we kept seeing over and over again with hundreds of companies coming through is the first one, so industry actually not knowing what they don't know. Which sounds really cliche, but it's amazing how true it is, and just not knowing the questions that they need to ask, and actually some of the things that they need to have in place for this kind of market access piece. And then the other one as well, which has completely slipped my mind, was very important, I'm going to look at it. Oh yeah, it was completely around assumptions. They're making assumptions on the unmet clinical need. And assuming that they know best, and making these assumptions even through the clinical champions that they're talking to, and assuming that that person knows all of it when actually they're a small piece of actually what is quite a large system, and there's a lot of things interconnected there. So about a year and a bit ago, we started another company called Air Clinical, and the idea there is to really try and give open, transparent access to those pieces, bringing the health economics forwards, helping companies better match in terms of TPPs. We've probably stolen a lot of the things that you were using and actually used them for other sectors as well, but the TPPs around COVID and how they've been rolled out across medtech, and actually it's a really nice model which could be used in so many other sectors as well, and we're kind of pushing that into other kind of sectors as well. But I think from my side, in terms of doing it quicker, you know, these companies are on timelines. Even the bigger corporations do have timelines they have to work to, and that doesn't always align with the NHS. And I think it's really that open communication, and it is a bit on industry as well, very much on industry, of making sure they're not making assumptions and that they're talking to lots of people. But within the NHS, why I love the Leeds ecosystem here, is making sure that you're being passed on to all the people, so you get to build that big picture, and it allows you just to move much quicker. Really, I hope that made some sense.
Yeah, no, thank you. Professor Rovers, delighted to have you from the Netherlands. Fascinated to hear how things happen there in terms of getting tech to patients and understanding sort of clinical needs. I always think of the Netherlands as one of the best places to take digital technologies, because you have often some of the best pathways for reimbursement, where technologies that we've seen today that patients can enjoy using at home are far easier to get to market in the Netherlands than the UK because of the difficulty in getting them paid for. So I'd love to hear more about your work in the Netherlands.
I wonder whether that's true, to be honest, because we also have to face the MDR in Europe. So all digital technologies now face the MDR. But maybe I can feedback, and because I see a lot of, well, UK is best, the Netherlands is best, we have to do it together, and I think it's co-creation. And in the Netherlands we formed something called Health Innovation Netherlands. In US they have Excite, and what we try to do is have round tables, and I would call it early value assessment. So you bring together all parties together. So it's industry is there, patients are there, reimbursement, healthcare insurance is there, healthcare institutes comparable to NICE over here. They're all at the table, and particularly in a very early phase, so you can discuss together with all stakeholders in an early phase, is this something we would like to have on the market yesterday, or it's not important at all and should steer it in a different direction. And I think that's a way to co-create. It's bringing together also the patient involvement in a very early phase and the early health economics, because it's still seen as different parts, and I think it's an iterative frame. So you use the unmet needs, do it in an early health economic analysis, and you can start very early because you can model already what's out there now. So you can model the current pathway, for example, for prostate cancer, and see where the gaps still are. And then you there might be an unmet clinical need. Then you can discuss it with patients, industry. Is that an unmet need? And you can head towards that. So we do these roundtables with all stakeholders involved. The Netherlands is a small country. No company will develop it for the Dutch market. No company will develop it for the UK market. We have to conquer Europe or the US together, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Any sort of examples of technologies that you've worked on that have been, developed in the Netherlands and brought into the UK?
Ooh, I don't know. I think we collaborate a lot with Philips, of course, which is a large company. They have their problems at the moment, but no, not a direct example from top of my head. But the Netherlands and UK are a bit similar because you also have the NHS, one reimbursement system. We have more or less similar system. So what I heard this morning, I thought, okay, I'm also director of a TechMed center in Twente, and I have an appointment as a professor of medical technology and innovation at a university medical center. There's so much reinventing the wheel in some places. So I'm also thinking, how can we combine and do things together even better than we do now?
Yeah, and it's very challenging at the moment with the MDR.
And I see different things in Europe. In Netherlands, you mentioned it. We see all companies, and we collaborate with the larger ones and smaller ones. Siemens, Philips, they all say we go to US first.
Yeah, and that's that again is deeply concerning. Any sort of questions from the audience on any of those sort of topics that we've covered? I'm quite open to anybody asking the panel any questions about their work in patient voice and economics and testing. Any questions at all?
Mike,
Yeah, please do.
can I answer the question I didn't answer before?
Please do, yeah.
I don't know how I could have forgotten.
Yeah.
So Leeds Surgical Tech, MedTech, have two outstanding project managers. One lady's at the back and one lady's outside. So they organise focus groups, which are held approximately once every 5 or 6 weeks. So patient representatives like myself, we either get an email or maybe a phone call now and again, and we get invited to 1.5 hour sessions where industry innovators and inventors come up with their fresh new ideas, and we give them a patient care perspective on how good their potential inventions potentially are and whether they will work. So they have input from us as potential patients, family members and carers from the initial conception of an idea before it goes into production and marketing and further stages along the patient journey. So I think that's where the patient voice is heard at its earliest stage. Here, Leeds Surgical MedTech, that's actually unique because I have lots of experience at other universities, but I've not come across these focus groups elsewhere. So Leeds Surgical MedTech are fairly unique in doing that and ensuring that the patient voice is heard by the people that matter and the innovators and inventors. So I should have said that right at the beginning. Focus groups.
That's really helpful, actually. Yeah, I've been bringing technologies up here for many years, and it's great to have this sort of infrastructure and passion for technology. So, great. I haven't got any other questions, actually. I don't know if we want to... David, do you want to jump in? Or?
No, just open to the audience.
Yeah.
Any questions from our panels? We've got a lot of expertise
Yeah,
here.
Perfect, yeah. Please do.
Someone starts.
Thanks so much
and
for
the
that
rest will
discussion.
follow.
Really, really interesting. So I represent the innovation pop-up at the Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust, and one of the bits of work that we've been trying to do since we were sort of set up is trying to understand how to do that unmet needs audit. How do we understand what those unmet needs are so that we can go out to the market and say, look, these are the problems we want to solve? Actually, that's a really difficult thing to do. It's really multifaceted. So actually, my question is, do you have any tips? Do you have any mechanisms that we can use to try and address that? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question, because I recognize it. We tried this for people with gliomas and also with strokes. And then indeed had a focus group with patients, with healthcare professionals. And from the patients in the beginning, they only said, we want better communication. So what I see is you have an idea of a product or an idea of where to improve. That's easier for people to comment on. So in our round tables, which look like the focus group, if you bring in an idea of a product, not a product yet, because then you spend all your money already, but then ask the patients, is this something you like? Where do you want to steer it? Then it does work. So it helps if you have some sort of idea where to head to, and then people can really say this is an unmet clinical need or not, and how to steer it. If you start completely from scratch or ask, well, diabetes, where do we, then you often indeed get better communication and that sort of things. But if you have an idea of a prototype or an idea of an innovation, then patients and all other stakeholders are very well capable of commenting on it.
So I think one thing that you're very fortunate to have here in Leeds is good, connected patient data and hospital and health and social care kind of connectivity around data systems. A few years ago, Beth Shinkins and I think David and others did some really interesting work modelling care pathways within the system, and highlighting and identifying bottlenecks and sort of points of kind of cost and patient outcome sort of deficits within the system, and starting to be able to identify from that where there are opportunities to improve the process, but also to improve patient outcomes. Now, it sounds easy to say and much harder to do, but there's an opportunity to do this across the whole system and to identify, perhaps in comparison with other jurisdictions, or just generally, where you have an excessive number of poor patient outcomes for a particular care pathway, and to start using the care pathway modelling system and data to understand those and to identify, what the root causes of those might be, and to start to unpick where there might be opportunities for innovation, particularly for diagnostics. I mean, diagnostics are wonderful tools for being able to triage and stratify patients into, prognostic priority and risk. And when you're faced with, significant backlogs like we have within the NHS 2-week wait, companies like Pinpoint Data Science have essentially built AI-based, blood tests that are able to stratify, which patients need to access those sort of those tertiary diagnostic services faster, and which ones can potentially, be deprioritized or discharged from, what is essentially a massive problem. And I think there's a lot of opportunities, particularly for diagnostics, to do more of that. Just while I've got the microphone as well, I think in addition to looking at new innovation, I think there's so much really good innovation that is on the shelf and the companies are running out of runway that is not being deployed and utilised in the NHS. So whilst we think about innovation as being in the sort of research, discovery, scientific innovation, shiny new things space, I think we also need a lot more innovation in how we actually put these things into practice, because the sort of the last valley of death, the using the things that are no longer shiny and, as Carl was sort of saying, sexy. How do we actually get those benefiting patients, and also returning, making a return on investment for investors as well, because, there's a serious concern, particularly in the UK, that investing in these technologies, it's a bit of a fool's errand, because nobody's ever going to buy them. This is why people want to go to the US, because you can't, there's a perception that you can't get innovation adopted into the NHS outside of its 17-year cycle. So, there's some wonderful technologies that NICE have approved. They've, done these early value assessment approaches to accelerate their evaluation. Some no-brainers that are just waiting to be implemented and commissioned that nobody's funding. And I think that's the opportunity for Leeds as well, is how can you be a leader in actually bringing these proven effective technologies to patients quickly?
And I think just to add on to that, part of the Health Tech Research Centre theme in terms of the observatory is making the most of the national data. We've got a lot of data in the UK that we could harness. We could look at better, not just in terms of patient pathways and where maybe pinch points are, but maybe where we're failing patients more in terms of outcomes, to identify, unmet need in terms of patient outcomes, and drive, innovation, look at what exists and whether that can be utilised in a different space, in a different way. And that's part of what the observatory, should help do.
It's a funny one, really, because not everybody wants to sit in a room and tell everybody else about their ideas. And I think part of what you guys need to do is almost create safe spaces. So that surgeon or that clinician that's got a good idea but doesn't want to stand up in a room and worried perhaps about losing IP, worried about other people jumping on his idea, and it's creating those safe spaces. So that's a clear message. I think it's a great opportunity when you've got these well-connected networks to be able to provide those safe havens where somebody can come in without any fear of judgment, perhaps with a small group of people, and have the opportunity to discuss it in confidentiality with the right support networks then to be able to grow that idea.
Just to jump on that as well, that's incredibly important for another reason as well, because it may not be the right idea. And actually, if you don't have those spaces, safe spaces to talk about it, you could push ahead with an idea that doesn't match up. But actually having that feedback, having that echo chamber with external people but in a safe space means that you can, maybe it's a slight twist on it, but then that is the right idea. And I think, just to reiterate what Mark said, we have a harder time in the UK in terms of bringing things into market because of who the customer is. It's very hard to do customer validation with the NHS because you may have a patient need, but you don't necessarily have the health economics argument to go with it. And that's why investors are kind of really pushing their companies as well, particularly in kind of in vitro diagnostics and immunoassays at the moment, to go to the US, because there's just much more of a market for it. Because if you convince one kind of private health practice network, they can just charge it to their insurer anyway. It's much easier to kind of have that sell. And then they think of that as a test bed. They can also reuse the data there as well, often in the UK, whereas the US is a lot stricter in terms of how the data is used and where the data comes from.
Okay. This one. Any other questions at all? No, don't be shy. I was just going to wrap up and say, on the diagnostic side, if you look at diagnostic assessment program at NICE, 80% of diagnostics that have gone to NICE have ended in research and 20% in recommendation. And it's the total flip on the medtech guidance side, where 80% are recommended and 20%. So that's quite worrying, but I think it's a sign that obviously the research that's being conducted on diagnostics isn't hitting what NICE are looking for. But just to sort of wrap up, really great running this panel. Advice from me about getting tech to patients faster is don't use the principles of marketing, which are product, price, place, promotion. Inventing products, then working out how much to sell them for, then finding a place to sell them, and then trying to promote them is a pretty archaic mechanism. I always say that the way to work out whether you've got a solution is to develop a technology that primarily benefits patients, benefits the providers that use them, the payers that pay for them, and the company should benefit from the profits of creating that solution. Because in this game of medtech, the biggest winners and losers are patients and investors, and we're sort of in the middle of it all. But appreciate the panel. Thank you so much for coming along. I'll hand over to David to wrap up.